So if you've been wondering what you should be doing right now, whether it's buying ILV to stake it or buying land, and which has the better value right now, I threw together some numbers, and by the end of this video, you'll know what the better bang for your buck is. Staking the ILV or buying land to play it. And on top of that, if you decide to buy land, I can tell you which tier land is the best value right now. So let's get into this. So you can see in the top left, I have two charts. One that says ILV and 95%, and the other one that says land, which is 5%. When you're staking ILV, you're going to get 95% of the in-game revenue as RevDis. And if you're playing your land, you'll get a share of 5% of that same in-game revenue. So we're going to look at the three different scenarios. For ILV, we're looking at what's currently staked, the current circulating supply, and the estimated max supply. So you can see right now we have about 3.3 million ILV staked right now. There's about 5.8 million in circulation, and there's a max supply or an estimated max supply of about 8 million. And that number still has a chance to drop down even further because when SILV2 is claimed, it burns the underlying ILV. When it comes to land, we're going to look at three different things. We're going to estimate how much land we think is actually going to be played. We have the current circulating supply, and we have a max supply. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that we have 20,000 plots already out. There's a max of 100,000 plots. How I'm calculating these land units, you can see in the chart in the bottom left. Basically, every tier 1 output is 1 unit. So you can see in this column here, a tier 1 is going to be equal to 1, obviously, because that's that tier 1 output. A tier 2 is going to have 4 times that output. So each tier 2 counts for 4 units. Tier 3 counts for 12 units. Tier 4 counts for 37.2 units. And then we have tier 5 in here, even though there's only going to be 7 total of those, and none of them exist right now. So using those numbers, you can see that we have about 90,000 land units with a max supply of 148,000. So up here for revenue per month, I have 2 sections in here. I have the in-game revenue, and then I have additional revenue. Now, the number I put in here really doesn't make much of a difference. So I'm going to keep it at 30 million per month, so that'd basically be 1 million per day. But this video isn't about how much RevDis you can make. It's about comparing the revenue distribution for staked ILV versus what you could earn in land. The reason it is important to have this additional revenue is because ILV stakers are entitled to more RevDis for revenue that comes in outside of the game. So this would be from like the merch store, or if there's a future movie or Netflix series or an Illuvifest, any revenue that Illuvium brings in that's not from in-game. Right now we're just going to keep that at 0, but I'll play around with that a little later in this video. I calculated the value of each land compared to the ILV, and I compared it in these 3 different scenarios. So the land we expected to be played versus the ILV that is staked, and then the circulating supply of land versus the circulating supply of ILV, and then the max supply versus the max supply. And I can change this percentage for land played, and I'll show you how that works a little later here. But for now, we're saying about 75% of the land is going to be played, or at least 75% of the potential output that the land can make will be utilized. In this scenario right now, if 75% of the land is played, 1 land unit is equal to about 2.6 ILV. And so now let's look at this bottom chart here. So we're saying each land unit is worth 2.6 ILV. Right now, we can see up here, ILV is sitting at about almost or just under $41. So when you're just looking at the in-game revenue, your land 1 plot is equal to about 2.6 ILV, which means its value right now is about 0.065 ILV or $106. And that's about a third less than its floor price right now. If you look at a tier 2, it should be equal to about 10.4 ILV, which is $424 or 0.26 ILV. And a tier 3 is equal to about 0.78, but the floor is sitting at 1.91. And then a tier 4 is equal to 2.4, and it is sitting at 5.7 right now. Now, when determining these numbers, the biggest guess I've put out there is how much of the land is actually going to be played. So we can fool around with this and say, we think only 50% of the land is going to be played. Well, all of a sudden that brings up each land unit to almost 4 ILV. putting in tier 1 at just about 0.01, bringing it closer to its current floor price. And by the way, as I'm going through this, I'm really hoping I'm not doing this right, even though I think I've put together a pretty good calculator. But if you think what I'm doing is wrong, please leave that in the comments so I can not only correct myself, but feel better about the land I own. Because right now, these calculations are showing that staking ILV is a better option than buying land right now. But here's another thing I can do with the calculator. First of all, about half of the land units in here are coming from the tier 4 lands. So if you think there are big whales or guilds or whatever out there who bought up these tier 4 lands and are probably not going to play it, you could go down and say, maybe you think only 40% of the land is actually going to be played. And if you're playing it, that increases the potential of your earnings. So based on the percentage of how much land you think is going to be played can determine if buying land is a better value right now. So if we look at this column right here of how much it's worth in ETH, we can bring down the percentage we think is played until it matches up with the floor price. So if we're looking at a tier 1, in order for us to think buying a tier 1 is better than staking the equivalent amount of ILV, we'd have to think that 30% or less of the land is going to be played and optimized. Now, when we're looking at a tier 2, we can actually go up to almost 45%. So now if you're thinking 45% or less of the land is going to be played, then at that point, buying a tier 2 land might be a better option for you. And then when we look at a tier 3 floor is sitting at 1.9. So we'll have to drop this back down to about 30%. And a tier 4, yeah, we're somewhere between 30 and 35%. So I personally think more than 30 or 35% is going to be played. I think it's going to be closer to 70, 75%. So from the calculations that I've put together, it seems to me that staking ILV right now is the better option. But the other thing we can tell from here, compared to its floor price, if you decided that you really did want to buy land, the clear best plot to spend your money on right now is a tier 2. Based on the fuel output that it can produce and its floor price, tier 2 is definitely the best deal on the market for land right now. Now, a couple other things to take into consideration before I end this video is, again, this was just calculating in-game revenue. So the case for ILV is even higher when you consider the non-in-game revenue. One other important thing is you also have to take into consideration that land can produce these blueprints. We don't know the market for the blueprints. Blueprints are what can create skins for the game. Although we have learned over the past, couple months that these are not the only skins that can be made for Illuvium, but these particular skins do require a blueprint. So if the market gets big enough for blueprints and those end up being quite valuable, it increases the value of land, but those are just going to be cosmetic and we don't know what that market looks like right now. So that's another thing that's not really taken into consideration here. I just took into consideration the fuel that you're going to produce if you were just selling it and not optimizing for blueprints. So I definitely should have said this a little earlier in the video, but I'm saying it now. None of this is financial advice. There's a chance I have something wrong here. And like I said, if I do, I hope it's pointed out, because from my calculations, it seems like the clear best option, staking ILV versus getting land to play, is staking ILV. Now, I have a good mix of staked ILV and land. I don't plan on selling off my land. But after looking deeper into this, if I do decide to put more of my capital into the Illuvium ecosystem, I'm probably going to stick with ILV and staking it. But let me know what you're doing. Do you plan on buying land? Do you think land has a better value than what I'm seeing right here? Or are you sticking with ILV? And if you stuck around to the end of this video, make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel. I've got some big things in the works, things that I'm working on, things that I'm planning on. I'm not in any rush. I'm trying to make sure things get done right as we prepare for this next bull market. So there you go. That's it. I'll catch you in the next one.